Do women like to be abused by their abusers? I have recently become interested in the topic of women who are in abusive relationships, and I don't know that much about it. So here's just a little bit that I've researched in the last couple days. And they're the women who get into abusive relationships have seen abuse in their home, so the abuse feels familiar. What doesn't feel familiar is people caring how you feel. Now, this all comes from how you were treated as a child, what love is, what love feels like, and how you were treated by your parents. Okay? And unfortunately, the way that it works is that people project their trauma, their childhood trauma, out onto their own children. So people who were sexually abused will sexually abuse their children. People who were raised in violent homes will be abusive to their partners or their children. It's perpetuated, unfortunately, until you break the cycle by healing yourself, by realizing what it is and forming new patterns. So women who grew up in homes where they were hit, abused, minimized, devalued, told they were a piece of shit, I wish you'd never been born, hit, no one cares when you're crying, that kind of stuff. That someone who's nice to them is not familiar. They don't want a nice guy. When you hear this saying that women like abusive men, it's traumatized women like abusive men. It's a trauma bond. It's not love. So they want to be loving, but they don't know anything better, okay? So it's the experience and it's the education, it's the knowledge. I really wish they would teach this stuff to kids in school. So as a child, if you were if you never were valued and appreciated just for existing, if your talents weren't recognized, if you weren't loved just for being you, then that's unfamiliar. And unfortunately, when someone gives that to you later on, you'll be mistrustful. It won't feel it'll feel uncomfortable. The drama is what will excite you. So that's the experience part. And it would be really nice to have like a list of things that a healthy man will do. I'm working on such a list, actually. I'm working on such a list. It's in edit mode right now. But you can also do some research online. You don't have to wait for me to give you the list. Now, what happens though, I think there's some energetic thing that we're drawn to certain people, that we find certain people attractive. But if their behavior doesn't match up with what we want, then we quickly lose interest. For example, if you watched my video from a couple months ago, I fell for this guy who was really charming, but certain red flags I wasn't okay with. The fact that he didn't keep his word, because I was raised in a family where people kept their word. So if someone wasn't, they would have still stayed interested in this guy because not keeping their word was familiar. Maybe this woman would have tried even harder to please him or whatever. I had my own issues that made me like him. I was looking for affection from this guy because he was hot and charming. And that's another red flag, actually. So let me go through the red flags that these men have that tend to be abusive. They're very charming. I'm starting to think that charm is a toxic trait. It's a mask. I mean, people can be charismatic, they can be joyful, they can be happy, they can be funny. But charm, I'm wondering if charm is like a mask, a red flag. Because I don't think people are naturally charming when the lights are off and they're not on a date. But they'll come on real strong, and they will do this thing called love bombing. They give the woman a lot of attention, tell her she's so great, and they want to get serious very quickly usually. Now, what kind of woman falls for this? I would be very leery of a guy who came on so fast and seemed so needy and so preoccupied with me, because that's unfamiliar to me. Typically, men move a little bit more slowly. They want to get to know you, and friendships move a little bit more slowly. So when someone is super, somebody who's super needy would really take to being love bombed, having all these gifts, having all these appreciation. Finally, someone notices me. I don't notice myself, but you notice me. You're giving me the love that I never had for myself, sort of thing. And so they fall into it very quickly. And I think the red flags may not come up on the first date, but maybe on the second date. These abusive men tend to have trouble regulating their emotions, which they may not show right away, but they tend to be controlling and jealous because they're not interested in you. They're interested in owning you and controlling you. So then they try to isolate you from your friends and family so that they can, pretty much have you to themselves, tell you what to wear. Now, see, something like that, to me, that already would be like, you're telling me what to wear? I don't think so, buddy. You're out of here. But if I were raised by a controlling parent, maybe that would feel familiar. Or maybe if I was raised by a controlling parent, I would choose someone who wasn't controlling. I don't know. A lot of this is kind of like a mystery still. But the men who are abusive, they don't just abuse that woman. They abuse all women. And the women who go for abusive men will go from abusive man to abusive man. But the guy isn't always abusive. So after he abuses, then he'll be really nice again. She likes the nice part. See, there's nothing in her brain that tells her this behavior is unacceptable, because if you don't have a sense of self, you don't know, you've never asked maybe, what are my needs? What do I deserve? How do I want to be treated? You just put up with whatever because this person love bombed you and you feel so loved and you're waiting for that again. And intermittently, he gives you that reinforcement. I think that for me, going for emotionally unavailable men was the same thing. I would just fall for them very quickly, and falling for someone very quickly is a really red flag. I really believe that the way to avoid falling for the wrong guys is to stay present. Stay present in this moment. Don't get carried away quickly. Keep your footing and realize, and this is again, not these women's fault that they fall for these guys. That's how they were raised. That's all they freaking know. And no one has told them or taught them. And they have to know what the characteristics are and how they can heal themselves. Otherwise, how can they? When these red flags come up, okay, let me get back to being present. So when we're present with ourselves and we know how to feel full in this moment, these red flags will pop out as unacceptable. But if someone's just living in their head or projecting some fantasy into the future, they're just going to be caught up in that instead of being really present with what's going on. How do I feel around this guy? Do I like how he treats me? But again, if this person is traumatized because their parents treated them that way, they won't even know to ask that. That's just what's familiar to them. And these women will say things like, I should have been nicer. I should have tried harder. I shouldn't have made him upset. And it comes from what seems like love, but it's really just, it kind of reminds me of a little girl trying to please mommy and daddy. If I'm just a better little girl, mommy and daddy won't hit me. If I'm just a better little girl, mommy will play with me. If I'm just a better little girl, daddy won't be mad at me, he won't hit me. And so it's just taking those childhood patterns out into adulthood. So, there's some great videos on YouTube. I've been watching them. There's a book called Why Does He Do That? I'm about to order. And this is really inspired by someone I was talking to recently on a coaching call. We got into this topic. And, he was asking me why some women like abusive men. And I really didn't know. I just said it came from it's because of childhood trauma. That's all they know. But then I got curious, like, what are the risk factors that can tell you if a guy is going to be abusive? And what are the things that these abusive men look for in a woman? What type of woman is good bait for the abusive guy? And it's someone with low self-esteem. Low self-esteem, no sense of self, codependent, and very needy for love outside of herself, and raised in a traumatic home, raised by trauma. Because a woman raised in a healthy home is not going to put up with that. She had to have been somehow neglected or abused herself. in order to feel like that's all she deserves. She's just a piece of shit. And if she's treated like shit, that's what she deserves. I don't know everything about it. I find this topic fascinating. You know, like, how can we help people not perpetuate the cycle of pain? And, you know, I find human behavior just very fascinating anyway. So I just find this as like a hobby of mine. So yeah, that's all I want to say on this video. And leave your, you know, interact with each other in the comments. If you have anything interesting to tell me about this, please email me, sharzadmorgan@gmail.com.